Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the public board meeting of May 9th, 2023. The Campbell River Board of Education would like to acknowledge that this meeting is taking place on the traditional territories of the Lakota people. Please note that there is a short production delay between the live event that you are viewing and the meeting participants. The question and answer function is open for questions on agenda items throughout this virtual meeting, and a final call for questions will be made after the last agenda items, with questions being addressed before the end of the session. So I do have some chairperson's remarks this evening. Good evening. I'd like to begin this evening by acknowledging the Red Dress Day movement held annually on May 5th. This movement initially began as an art installation by Métis artist Jamie Black to honor the memory of murdered and missing Indigenous women, girls, and two-spirited people. Through an artist's eye, attention has been drawn to the disproportionate gender violence faced by Indigenous women, girls, and two-spirited peoples, and has sparked a national conversation and movement to demand action to be taken to address this issue. I encourage everyone to research some of the work done by the Red Dress Advocates and to follow current calls to action presented on Parliament Hill on May 2nd by Member of Parliament Leah Gazin. Also in the month of May, I also ask that we take a moment to honor the discovery of the 215 graves in Kamloops just 2 years ago. As I reflect on the impacts of this discovery and the ongoing investigations that continue to discover burial sites across our country, I feel deep personal sadness. I also feel the urgency to change and reset the balance between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Canadians. We as leaders in education have opportunity to impact this change. We have the capacity to be in-betweeners, so eloquently phrased at the BCSTA AGM last month by keynote speaker Jody Wilson-Raybould. An in-betweener is willing to step into the silence that divides and silos our communities from one another. They are leaders that recognize opportunities in the overlaps between our governance structures and are willing to dig in to change historical systems in service of all Canadians. They engage openly in the hard conversations so necessary to show us a path forward to real truth and reconciliation. As a governor in public education, I hope to aspire to being the best in-betweener I can be. And I'm comforted in the belief that my colleagues at this table feel similarly. Paraphrasing Justice Sinclair, it is through education that we have hope to get out of this mess, to build an equitable education system that celebrates the gifts of every child and in some way honors those children who never came home. Finally, as we move closer to the end of the 2022-2023 school year, I'd like to acknowledge the ongoing work of grad committee volunteers, fundraisers, parents, and school-based partners as we return to ceremonies that look more familiar. As a mom of a graduating student, I deeply appreciate the efforts and work being done that will allow my own son to leave our K-12 system with grand celebration. Thank you for your time. On to superintendent remarks.
Well, thank you very much, Charity. I almost feel like a moment just to reflect on your opening would be appropriate, but it's my turn to speak, so I'll just get right to it. I just echo your sentiments for sure. I am looking forward tonight to the educational presentation from Cedar Elementary School about the literacy intervention that's been happening this year. I do want to start by congratulating both Phoenix and Sandown, who placed 2nd and 4th respectively for their efforts on this April Earth Day. They participated in a competition that was based on cleanup within the community, and each school received a cash and, even more treasured by middle schoolers and elementary schoolers, pizza. So congratulations to both schools for your stewardship. I did have the chance to watch Carrie High's musical The Newsies on opening night earlier this month. It was particularly meaningful as a number of the people in the audience were students who were originally cast in the Newsies production of 2020 that unfortunately never got to perform because of the pandemic. Just the thoughtfulness of the drama department to set up a tribute to the cast of 2020 and across the hallway the tribute to the cast of 2023. And what's really magical is there's a number of grade 12 students who were cast in grade 9 that were there as grade 12 students to actually get a chance to perform that. Just the diversity of the cast, the number of people, the sense of community and song, clearly highlighting some of the gifts and talents of our students, but also a production like that is only possible because of sacrifice and dedication of teachers, and I especially want to note Christine Knight and Beth Kingston's role in that musical. In fact, it was interesting at the end, just the performance of those kids, even though the musical isn't sad, I just found myself a number of times with that like welling of emotion just because the kids were just giving it and they were looking like they were loving it. And so it was actually quite a moving musical. I guess musicals can do that, but it was beautifully done. I just want to share some exciting news that the district track meet that has not taken place for a number of years will be taking place again this spring on May the 25th. So we're excited because it's a great event for our students and it's real coming together of our school community. Ready, Set, Learn and Welcome to Kindergarten events are happening now, and schools are thrilled to be working with families and welcoming new students to the district. But while we're talking about new students to the district, it's also important to recognize that this is a difficult time of transition for a number of families if they're moving from elementary to middle or middle to secondary, or for those really emotional moves of moving to school itself in kindergarten. And so I just want to note that we recognize that this can be particularly challenging for some families and students, and that we are and very willing to hear from families. So if there's additional needs or requiring supports, we are asking for those families to connect with their school principals so that additional supports can be provided to support that transition. Summer school registration will begin on May 15th. There's a huge number of programs. We're expecting that it will be as popular as ever. I do want to point out that there is a slightly different registration process. So for families that have registered before, it will be a little bit different this year. So you may want to check out the registration in advance of the 15th. We're getting that message out as much as possible, but just as another note, an opportunity to share that. I wanted to share that tomorrow night, I will actually be meeting with education reps from 8 different countries who will be here in Campbell River, representing Thailand, Taiwan, Japan, Chile, Korea, Brazil, Vietnam, and Mexico. Every time I have the opportunity to connect with people who represent organizations that send international students to Campbell River, it just reminds me of the incredible opportunity and chances that we have in our school district that we provide to our youth and to those youth that choose to come here from overseas. It's also such a privilege to meet on this beautiful traditional territory of the Liquito Nation. Because Campbell River is such an amazing community, and obviously there's the physical beauty, but also the friendliness of the people in this town. I want to finish by updating about how a few of our students have done who qualified for the provincial skills competition earlier this month. Just qualifying for provincials meant that these individuals had to win a gold in the regional competitions. All 5 students that went to provincials won a medal. So we had 5 students that went, and they went to the Skills Counter Provincials over in Abbotsford on April the 19th. 3 of those 5 won gold medals, earning those students a chance to compete at the national event in Winnipeg later this month. So Matthew Baker, just a little shout out to the individuals. Matthew Baker of Timberline Secondary took provincial gold in website development. Elliot Siddick and Logan Jones of Carey High earned gold in 3D animation. And also congratulations to Andrew Haribko from Timberline Secondary, who earned the silver medal in cabinet making, and Marcus Johnson of Carey High for his bronze in welding. So congratulations to those students and good luck at nationals.
Thank you, Superintendent Morrow. Moving on to agenda item 3, which is the approval of the minutes of the meeting of April 18th, 2023. May I have a mover? Moved by Trustee Gillis, seconded by Trustee Harper. Is there any discussion? No? The minutes have been passed. On to any business arising from the minutes. Seeing none. Additions or alterations to the agenda. Trustee Harper?
Yes, I have a motion that I would like to go for under item number 12, electorate and board matters, with the topic being the funding and administration of the international program.
Okay. And then Excellent. Are there any further additions or alterations to the agenda? Seeing none, the motion reads that the agenda is hereby approved as amended. May I have a mover? Trustee Briggs, seconded by Trustee Gladish. Any discussion? All those in favor? Excellent. On to the report of board decisions from the May 19th confidential board meeting.
Yes, we dealt with matters of teaching, administrative and support staff changes, and legal and financial issues.
Thank you. There's no correspondence submissions, no public submissions, no agenda submissions, and we are on to educational submissions. I'd like to welcome Principal James Zatlinoff. That's very hard to say. Teacher Jennifer Como and our elementary literacy coordinator Christine Fraser up from Cedar Elementary. Yay, Cedar!
Okay, thank you so much. I just wanted to say, I wanted to thank everyone for the opportunity to not only to do this presentation, but to even for myself personally for the opportunity to be at Cedar. I'm really enjoying working with incredible professionals that you see up here, and with the whole staff, and the kids are absolutely wonderful. And also, I'm very happy to be living here on the territory of the Lake Patrol people. It's been an absolute pleasure. And so yeah, just before the presentation gets going here, which will be led by Christine and Jennifer, I just wanted to say that you'll see a lot of numbers in this presentation, and that's good. Some of them are quite positive, and we're quite excited about all the progress. But as you're looking at those numbers, I want you to also think about those students that represent those numbers, those smiling faces, those faces that show so much pride when they go, when they go to those levels, and when they succeed through Jennifer's program. And also to understand, right, and many of you are familiar with Cedar and you've been there lots, but this is a school that's so primed for learning, right? And you see those gains every single day, and that pride that comes into the students, and the ability they have, and it's really exciting. It's a really exciting place to work. Thank you. I will introduce Jennifer. Or sorry, Christine first.
Oh yeah, so I'm one of the literacy coordinators for elementary. And I've been working with Cedar for 5 years now, and I go to that school weekly along with 4 other schools. And what I've observed at Cedar is kids that are well equipped to learn, ready to go. I've also observed kids who live with poverty and all the social problems that come with that, unfortunately, and kids who have had multi-generational trauma through colonization and systemic racism and the social issues, of course, that come with that. But that's not an excuse for low achievement, and it's not a prediction for low achievement. What it does, what it forces us to do as educators is problem solve and think, okay, how do we meet the needs of these kids? How do we, especially in literacy, how do we get these kids reading and writing competently so they can go out in the world and have great lives? I can tell you, I've been in every single one of the classrooms, and all of those teachers are working so hard at the classroom level, you know, creating that first wave of intervention of really good classroom teaching. And then, but it still wasn't enough, even with our LST, not quite enough. Because the LST, we have to, learning support teachers, so we have to understand, and our Indigenous support teachers, we have to understand they're working with all kinds of other things, not just literacy, right? Lots of behavior and other things that come up in schools. So to have a person like Jennifer, who is, you know, highly qualified to do this literacy intervention, to be there every single day for that consistent daily intervention with the kids who need it, I think you'll see by the data is making a huge difference. So I think we've problem solved our way into it. I hope that next year the board might consider you know, having someone like Jennifer half-time starting right from the get-go, right in September, Because we know that these kids are there and they need us right away. We know from the numbers that they're going to be there next year too. So I'll let Jen take it away.
So thank you, everyone, and thanks for having me. I've been fortunate enough to be working at Cedar here for the last few months. So I started work in January with them, and I taught grades 2 through 5. We decided to target the older groups because those are our COVID babies, and we wanted to get their skills up as quickly as possible. So up here it says in total I assessed 49 students that were identified by teachers as potentially needing support. So this is also in conjunction with our learning support teachers and ELL and James. So of those 49 that I assessed, 34 or 71% were confirmed as needing some form of support through the PRESS decoding inventory. Out of those 34, 20 or 59% identify as Indigenous. Same thing after spring break. Based on timing, we didn't want to just stay with the older kids. We also want to bump up our younger ones so that next year we're kind of trying to sandwich the gap that's happening. So after spring break, I've now begun working with 34 kindergarten to grade 2 students, totally a different type of teaching. And once again, I didn't write it in here, but 20 students are once again identified as Indigenous, so almost 60% that I'm working with. So what are we doing? So in my class, we are working on a whole bunch of different things. So we're working on learning the basics of letters and sounds, CBC words, digraphs, which are your TH, CH, WH, all of those fun things. Blends, silent E and vowel teams, and variant vowels. I would like to point out that I was working with all of these for grades 2 through 5. So this isn't the K to 2 section. Also with the variant vowels, I wasn't able to actually get to teach variant vowels because of time. There's students that were never able to get the service that I would have preferred to give them because there just isn't enough time to go around. So with that in mind, this is where we began. So I split our kids up into smaller groups, normally of 3 or 4, sometimes 5. So we had one group that was working on letters and sounds, 3 groups that were working on CBC words. Those are like cat, sat, mat, sit, lip, all those fun ones. And then 2 groups were working on those digraphs. So I work with each of these groups for 20 minutes, Monday through Friday. So my hours are 9 to 11:30, and I try and fit as many little beans in as I can in that period of time. Now, this next graph is where we were as of March 25th. So it's a little bit of numbers here, and I will, in my next slide, show you a little bit cleaner how it is. But what you can see is we have a dramatic shift. So here in January is the dark orange, February is the light orange, and the blue is March. So you're seeing that we're making this trend towards harder skills. With the caveat, once again, though, that 7 invariant vowels did not get support. So if those 7 had been able to get supported, our number of total students still requiring support potentially could have been down by another 7 from starting at 34. So to make it a little bit cleaner, that's what it looked like at the end. So after one session, our kiddos that were still working on letters and sounds, they were good to go. We only had 1 student working still on CDC letters. That student is on an IEP. 3 working on digraphs, 3 on blends, 7 on silent E. And once again, I couldn't even get to this because of time. So it's a reduction of 13 students needing support in literacy skills and decoding, which is pretty amazing that we're taking these little ones who are struggling with the basics of how to sound out a word or the rules that we use for reading. We've now got 13 students working on fluency now. They know how to do the skills. With that in mind, and having such a large Indigenous population at Cedar, I actually went further in and looked at our Indigenous students and looked at where they ended up tracking over the 3 months. So when we began, we were at 59%. By February, we were down to 48, and by March, we were down to 44. So this is a decrease in 50% of our students needing intervention for our Indigenous population. And once again, that's only over 3 months. Now on to the dibbles, and I apologize for your eyes in advance. So with that in mind and what I was finding, I went in and I looked at the dibbles because the dibbles is district-wide, and I wanted to see, okay, where's Cedar at in comparison to the rest of the district? So using the February dibble information, kindergarten, we didn't have any because it wasn't required by the district. Come spring, I guess end of May here, we will have data for the kindergartners. Grade 1 students, the dibbles identified 62% as needing intensive support and 10% as needing strategic support. Grade 2 is the one that kind of hits me in the gut, which is 60% intensive and 20% strategic. So that's 80% of our students in grade 2 are struggling. Grade 3, 71% intensive and 8% strategic, 50% intensive, 17 strategic, and 59 and 7. Like I said, I had a pit in my stomach when I saw these numbers, and the presentation was born from that. So this is where I apologize for your eyeballs. So I went in and I mined all the data for 2021 and 2022. So I took the district data, took out grade 7, 8, 9, and then compared it to Cedar on the right. So the district beginning of the year, we had 53 identified as needing intensive support and 18 needing strategic. For Cedar, we're looking at 16% more needing the intensive support. In the past, intensive support has been your learning support, very one-on-one. These are danger kids, hence why it's in red. So that's a lot. That's a lot to have 16% more than the district. And here's the dibbles for now. So once again, district, we're looking at 49% of our students needing intensive support and 13 needing strategic. And if you look over here for Cedar, we're looking at 60 and 12. So once again, there's a jump that isn't great. Now, in regards to the strategic plan and how we can actually help our kiddos, I was looking at it and I was like, okay, what in the strategic plan can this program do? So thinking about it, I went, okay, continuing with fully supported intervention will provide multiple opportunities for the district to meet their goal by raising, well, fully meeting or meeting the expectations in literacy. By that, it's going to improve your graduation rates, because we know that if students aren't reading by the end of grade 3, their graduation rates decrease substantially. We're helping our Indigenous and non-Indigenous students have equity across all measures. And staff and parents and community are also going to be getting updates from myself on how their little ones are doing. Furthermore, for the measures of how we will know if we have succeeded, the data at Cedar is already demonstrating that increased tier 2 targeted support is one of the factors that will help support the district in reaching their literacy goal. As far as supports go, tier 3 is normally, am I getting it wrong? Tier 1 is most intensive support. That should only be about 5% of our school population. Those are our students that are on an IEP needing one-to-one support. Tier 2 is intervention, where our district currently has a big gap in that it's not really there. And then tier 3 is where 80% of our students should be, and they should be learning from the classroom teacher. So we have a big gap between tier 3 and tier 1 and a whole bunch of kids getting lost in the mix. With that being said, part of my job that I love so much is I get to work one-on-one or in small groups with these little ones. So I'm able to pick up on things that not necessarily the classroom teacher with 24 other little beings is going to be able to recognize. I can then go to the teacher and say, hey, did you notice that this little person reads sideways when they're trying to read? Have they had their eyes checked? Oh, no, they haven't. Little one is now on a vision IEP because they had never checked his eyes. You've got students who are doing different things with their language that I'm able to go to our speech and language pathologist and go, hey, is this person on your caseload? Have you checked in on this person? And I'm able to kind of head off some of these things before they end up going to LST, IEP, needing all of those other interventions that may not necessarily be actually what's needed. What they actually need is just a little extra loving to push them along. So with that in mind, I thought targeting schools that have the reduced literacy outcomes, such as Cedar, with increased supports will ensure that this goal is met over time. An intervention, I strongly believe, needs to be delivered by a teacher with knowledge and experience and who's able to adapt strategies and identify barriers for students' learning. I know in the past, oftentimes intervention was given to newer teachers because it was a small point of a contract. And I firmly believe you need to have someone in there that's able to pick up on these subtle learning differences and go, oh, this isn't working for you. I actually have extra tools in my in my bag that I can try instead. And with that, does anyone have any questions? Yes, Dave.
So am I understanding you do 20 minutes of one-on-one?
20 minutes with either 3 to 5.
Okay, 3 to 5, but
Yeah.
basically very small
Very
group.
small.
So this reminds me very much of the very successful Faye Foster method.
Mhm.
And I salute you. Like anything that you can do to get children reading and writing at grade level by grade 3 bears fruit for the child and the world. So
Thank you, Dave.
that's
And one of the
that's remarkable data in only 3 months.
Yeah,
And
And
it
that's-
proves that 20 minutes a day makes a difference.
20 minutes a day does make a
Yeah.
difference. And one of the things that I really enjoy in my groups in particular is I make my room a safe space. You can make all the mistakes you want with your reading. We aren't here to judge. We play games, we have fun. The kids don't know that they're learning because we're having fun and Mrs. Como's being silly. But I found that having them out of the classroom in certain circumstances gives them the breathing room to be able to actually try where their peers aren't around. So.
Trustee Hagan.
Yes, I happen to be a graduate of Cedar School. I'm not sure if I did a good job or not. It's really odd. My dad was in construction, and by the time I got to Cedar School, I probably moved 4 or 5 times, had no idea what was going on. But a teacher there told me I had nice E's. So I came the next day with a whole book full of E's. I didn't realize it was probably just meant that it was from an A, B, C, D, E scale. It was probably the 1. And then we moved again, and I moved to Campbell School, and I failed that grade. I just didn't know what was going on, but it was over the long haul. Then I moved to Willow Point School, And there was one single teacher that saw me and said, "Who's that skinny little rat? And you go home and get your first A and I'll give you some change in my pocket." But I never looked back. Once given that chance of understanding and being able to start to read and what were the instructions really, it just kind of opened up my whole life to, you know, graduating president of my class at university. I mean, it's amazing how a teacher can intervene to change people's lives. In a program like this, I could see that happening. And that just brought it all back, that I can't remember what I enjoyed more, writing my E's or whether it was playing out on the playground, but, you know.
It's the foundation, right? The foundation.
Yeah. Anyways, I wanted to say thank you for reaching out to one of the schools that I attended, and
Yeah.
much appreciated.
And like I said, in an ideal world, there would be more time so that I could get to every single little person and get them well on their way. It's part of my makeup where I don't leave anyone behind. Doesn't go well with me. So even though I'm not working technically with those grades 2 through 5s, any opportunity I get, hey, what's in your book then? Let's go. And doing all of those kind of fun things that I have the opportunity to do. Teachers in the classroom have so many other little people. I'm able to come in and give that individualized support for our learners that learn in different ways and at different rates.
Trustee Briggs?
I have a grade 2 student, and she's not behind or anything, but I have found that she was a bit behind because of the pandemic, but reading with me as a parent and her, just how frustrated she gets when it's with me, and that doesn't happen with her teacher.
Yeah.
Like just 20 minutes with someone else other than me would make a world of difference.
Yeah, and it's also a case of building up the confidence and the skill so that when you do come across a challenge, you actually kind of know how to tackle it rather than the good old sound it out.
And I'm not a
Doesn't work.
teacher. I'm just a regular parent. I'm trying to help her, but I don't have.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a huge part for me, is just that confidence and building these little people up, that even though, say you're in grade 5 working on CDC words, boy, oh boy, am I giving you a gold star happy face when we get to digraphs, right? It's important.
I just wanted to acknowledge your passion and the passion of the Cedar team, because actually you just were looking into my head and I have this little phrase I always say, skills plus confidence equals success. And then if you build at the platform of knowing people believe in you and who you can be and will be, if you have the right supports. And so just hats off. Look at what happened with Daryl.
I'm not too good to look at it.
Trustee Harper?
You gave an example of what a CVC word is, but what does CVC stand for?
Consonant, vowel, consonant.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, you know, it's been a long day at the pumps and now I'm here, so I had to ask.
I do have a couple of questions, Christine. Just, can you describe to me how the intervention that you're doing kind of one-on-one in small group ties into the classroom teaching? Like, is there some interaction between the teacher and
100%. So for myself, whatever I'm teaching in my intervention group, it's directly related to the teacher, and then they also highlight that skill when they are reading with their student and making sure that, oh, we are working on digraphs. So anytime that I see TH, I'm gonna go, oh, Thursday, reinforcing those skills in context of what it actually needs to be. I also give the teachers, and I'm talking to them every time when I'm walking in the door. Basically, it's a daily update of what went well, what didn't go well, what should we work on next. And then I do a report normally at the very end of our time together to send home. And one of the beauties of my position is after 3 sessions, if a student is not progressing, it's normally a sign that maybe some further assessment needs to happen. And often that's in consultation with their teacher and what they're noticing in their classwork. So I'm the in-between. I'm the intermediary.
So just as a follow-up to that, to elevating a student for potentially an IEP assessment, what is the capacity of Cedar to, I'm worried about those grade 3 to 5s that are needing intensive intervention. They're getting 20 minutes a day, and 2 years from now, they're rolling on to middle school with no supports. So what kind of capacity does Cedar have for that intense kind of IEP, let's get this diagnosed and move forward with this learning for the child?
Well, we have a hardworking staff.
You do.
That's number one. We also, we target our intervention. This is why that we find this so important to us, because we target that intervention into the one skill that is so transferable and sets you up for success in further grades, which is literacy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Continue that with building community, with obviously understanding the territory we're on and how Indigenous ways of understanding kind of intervene through that. But the capacity, yeah, I mean, there is students on IEPs at our school, and again, like the teachers in the classroom work extra hard. Our EAs are spectacular, and they put in the time. And then of course, anytime somebody like Jennifer is able to take those small groups, the passion that you can see that comes from her shows in the difference making. And again, and what I said at the beginning of the presentation, our students have the capacity. They have the desire, and they have the capability to do it. Right? So.
I don't ever doubt that, but I'm just curious. I just want to know whether or not those kids that are demonstrating necessary literacy interventions in 3 to 5 are getting IEPs that are following them into middle school so that their literacy challenges,
Yes.
just the
In a
capacity
nutshell,
of it.
yes. So it's my hope that with additional time and continued support year after year, not starting in January, not having it for 1 year, having it for another year, by having continued support, I think you're going to find that the number of students that need these IEPs is going to go down.
Mm-hmm.
Just based on time in front of a person.
Mm-hmm.
Someone who is targeted, someone who is skilled. And I really do believe that intervention is just, for these schools that have chronic low literacy rates, we know it. Why not put the supports in for a short term, as in a year or 2, and then move on, rather than 3 months, 6 months. Like, I'm only 0.5 at Cedar. I could 100% do 100% at Cedar, and it would go a long, long way. It would go a long, long way.
Morgan? Oh, sorry, Jen. Jen, then Morgan.
Jen.
Okay, sorry,
Jen.
you said Jen, of course. So your 0.5, that was my question. And it sounds like what you're doing is miracle work there, and teachers love you. I'm sure kids love you as well. So I'm wondering what would it look like if you were 100%, and you know, what would it do for the children? I think we would see quite a bit of improvements, and I know that's what we all are looking for. DIBELS, that is an assessment. Does it mainly assess the decoding?
Yes.
Okay, so decoding is really important. We want kids to be able to read, but how are you measuring comprehension? Because I mean, there's literacy is a number of different things, including.
Absolutely. My job at this point, because I'm on such a short timeline, I'm focused only on decoding. If I had, like you said, more time, once those kids get through their decoding skills, I would be going through Fane Brownlee and looking at all of those different comprehensions, connections to text, all of that, really rich stuff. And that would be in consultation, once again, with the classroom teacher and going, hey, this is what I'm using here. Maybe you want to bring in this in here, using this graphic organizer. So it's not just me with the students, it's also me with teachers and helping to support them as well. But yeah, it's a very, very valid question. And like I said, unfortunately, it's just the time.
So many other questions, but I'll just leave it for now. Babe Brown.
You can email me.
Yeah.
I just want to add to the conversation, because I had the pleasure of going and hearing James and Jen before and what the work is happening there. But I also want to say that the intervention work with those kids, that Christine's doing that work and has been 3 years for Cedar, for all teachers to build that capacity so that there can be some, you know, noticing of teachers going, oh, one, how's my pedagogy? Learning more about literacy and how to break it down for all kids. So I think that's been, you know, really helping Cedar on that trajectory, and that continues. So you've got the individual with the students, and you've got a coordinator working with teachers, and of course Jen working with teachers as well. But some of the kids have learning gaps, so they won't all be on an IEP. So, you know, with the intervention and the classroom teacher and the work that's being done there will be some that will need an actual intervention or an IEP, because there is, you know, diagnosis from a school psychologist, but some have learning gaps. And so that extra time focusing on particular skills is certainly making a difference, and we're seeing that.
Yeah,
So
I
I'd
was
say the
gonna say,
majority are the
yeah, a majority is learning gaps. I was just gonna say, you can think of kids that are behind in two different ways. You can think of them as the ones who have been diagnosed or designated with another issue that's getting in the way of their learning. And then you can think of the catch-up kids, right? They missed something. They have gaps in their learning. Maybe they had a bad year where they didn't attend very much in grade 1. Maybe, or, you know, there was a pandemic. Or maybe they had a year where their parents were going through a divorce, or, you know, something was going on where they missed things. Well, those are the kids that Jen is targeting, right? Those are the kids, the other kids with designated issues, the LST and certainly the Indigenous support teacher and all of the classroom teachers are working very hard with these kids, but it's those kids that we know we can catch up when we identify the gaps and we start filling those gaps in. And to me, that is the group that doesn't need IEPs. They just need good teaching, and off they go on their merry way.
And just further to Morgan's point of the work that Christine's been doing for years, the data does show growth from the beginning classes to the end classes on overall, and this is in conjunction with that growth. And it identifies the students that kind of boost that overall growth, because we're looking at them as individuals.
I think there's always a danger with intervention, because intervention shouldn't need more intervention, right? The goal of intervention is less intervention, right? The goal is to get everybody doing what they need to be doing with less intervention, not codependence on intervention that we need all the time. But you know, you run the risk of saying, oh, we need all this intervention, and then all of a sudden we don't. So what do we do now? You know, so it's a bit of a scale. You know, you always have to think about the greater good and how we're balancing intervention with that classroom practice.
And like I said, that goes to my point of give it 2 years. Give it 2 years at one school. Then look at what other school needs, supports, and have it going to those that need it. If you got us, I said to James, I think it was one of our first meetings, I said, I think I'm gonna end up, my hope is that I work myself out of a job. That's my hope, is that I've got all of these little ones reading and they don't need me anymore. That's my goal.
Just one last point about them going up to middle school. I'm not sure if it was Jan or you had said, there's been such conversation around literacy at the elementary level that teachers are more curious, administrators are more curious. I think we're all more curious and we're learning more and more. And what that has done is got an energy going at middle and secondary about literacy and how do you break it down? Because once you're at high school in particular, you're, you know, reading to learn. not learning to read, but that is the reality of some of the kids in middle and secondary. So we've now got a lot of educators really digging down into more fundamental literacy skills that they've not had to draw on before. So the movement that we've got going on in elementary across all the schools is got that curiosity and that learning going, oh my God, we don't know how to necessarily, teach how to read at those grade levels. So that momentum that we've got going, that's been going on at elementary for the last couple of years is moving. So over some time, we are absolutely going to see improvement. And,
sure.
and kids being successful and feeling good about their learning and being at school. So it's exciting time, absolutely.
Thank you very much for your presentation, and Cedar's such a heart school. It's such a heart school, and those littles just so deserve every shot at being successful learners throughout their learning career.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time.
Okay.
Okay. On to agenda item 12A, funding and administration of the international program. Trustee Harper.
Point of clarification, Chair. So I'll move my motion and seek a seconder, and then if I have one, how long do I have to speak to the motion?
Minutes to speak to the motion, and then we'll open discussion, but you'll leave the discussion lead.
Plural. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't intend to be outrageously verbose, but just.
I'm not breaking out the gowns. It's
You
okay.
didn't
Okay.
use the word hours.
I'll stick to the standard of my former union. Okay, obviously I'll be tight, but okay. So who's writing this down? So I say it clearly. So under no circumstance shall surplus revenues from the international program paid for by international student fees be spent on any other district program. And I seek a seconder.
For discussion, I'll second that.
The motion has been seconded. Can we read back the motion? Did somebody get that? The motion reads that under no circumstances.
I'll repeat it. Under no circumstance shall surplus revenues from the international program paid for by international student fees be spent on any other district program. And I have a seconder in Mr. Hagan, it would appear.
Sorry, I'm only as far as surplus revenues from.
Under no circumstance shall surplus revenues from the international program
Thank you.
paid for by international student fees be spent on any other district program.
Thank you.
All right, so I can open?
You can.
Okay, so I was shocked last year before I was a trustee to discover that the previous budget was balanced, in fact, partly by taking $150,000 from the international student surplus. Because when the international student program first came into the district, Dr. Croskery was adamant that that was in a box, that it stood alone, it was inviolable, not to be touched. The program had to stand on its own. The district would not be rating it so that we could do other stuff and make a profit off of it. I thought that was pretty admirable, right? For a guy who was saying we should put ads on the buses. All right, but that's a sidebar. So it was also said in the budget package, as I recall, that this was a one-off. Now, I noticed that in the draft agenda that's here, the draft budget, it's not put as a one-time thing here. The benefit holiday is, but this time it's not saying one time because this would be the second time. Now, I bring this motion forward because I don't want to discuss it as part of the budget. This is a matter of principle. We have people overseas who have sent us thousands upon thousands of dollars to buy a place in our schools and for us to have a homestay coordinator to find them a place to live. and they're trying to get an education, but they're also trying to have an experience and hone the English language and everything that means while they're here. It's about 70 FTE students. Now, by my math, if we got 100K surplus, either we got to be delivering a lot more services, or we need to charge lower fees, or that money should be going towards the homestay families to increase the quality of the homestay that they're giving, or maybe they could have money for respite, and that might entice more people to want to bring in homestay students, which we're struggling to find because I can see the Facebook ads just like everybody else. But the one thing that we don't want to do is go down the road of setting ourselves up with another structural deficit, because that's what this is. You go down this road of robbing this pot, it's a structural deficit. You're booting the 100K problem down the line, and it's not a good idea. It's bad practice. Yes, Progressive Dave is a super fiscal conservative, and I think we all should be. This pot stands alone, and I'll say this, and there will probably be people out there watching who might be shocked at what I'll say now, but we got a local program, a hockey program, and if that line item said instead, hockey program surplus, it'd make the cover of the papers and people would be upset and they'd want their money back and want to know why it wasn't being spent on more rink time for their kids. This is wrong. It's absolutely wrong. And I certainly hope that I can convince 4 of you, 3 of you is what I need, to agree with me, to say, no, this has to stop, and it stops now. Because if we do it this year, we're going to do it next year and the year after. Okay? Now, I'm not blaming anyone here because there's nothing on the books. All we have is Operational Procedure 303, and it's silent. But that's not good enough. I think this board needs to make a decision and make it really clear, one way or the other.
So the motion on the floor is that under no circumstances shall surplus revenues from the international program paid for by international fees designated, that's as far as I got.
Be used or no,
Be
be
spent.
spent on any other district programs.
Just to clarify, the international program, there is no policy in our board governance manual that addresses the international program. The international program is an operational policy. So I just want to clarify that. If we are to pass this motion, it will be a motion for the board to write a governance policy that will oversee the international program. It's a much bigger policy than one line item. It will be a board governance policy that governs the international program, because we can't write an operational policy.
But the operational policy would become clear from passing this motion. That's my point.
Okay, did I get process?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. So any further discussion? Trustee McMahon.
Yes, Trustee Harper, I'm wondering if you would think that if we should take $100,000 from the international students, the income we've gotten from them, and place it into our system to be able to support the school district programs in whole, if there is no benefit to international students by supporting the system as a whole.
No, there is no benefit.
There's no benefit for us.
No, because
having
we're
a
taking
secure-
money that we wouldn't have had otherwise. The pandemic showed that we had no students. And what did we do? We were fine because we hadn't gone down this road yet. Last year, this road we went down it.
I don't think you're answering my question.
Yes, I am.
Are
Let me
you?
answer it a different way.
Okay.
Okay? There is the only benefit that you get out of doing what you're doing is you're pretending that you can do more with less. And I don't agree with pretending we can do more with less. How are we doing more with less? By taking money that we shouldn't have otherwise. If we didn't have an international program, taking that money that's surplus to needs, because either we're charging too much, we're not providing them enough services, or we're not giving the homestay parents enough money, and we're using it to put off a difficult decision, which is a 100K cut, because we haven't got as many students coming into the system as we used to. We're putting off the inevitable. You do it this year, you're gonna do it again and again and again. So we need to make a position on this now. We need to decide. If everyone disagrees with me, fine. That's the way it goes. But that means that we're telling management that this is an okay way to go, and let's start bringing in more students and let's start cutting back so we can generate more surplus and try to pretend that we can carry on doing stuff that we can't afford because we're going to subsidize it with kids from the 8 countries you just mentioned.
Is there any further discussion?
Yeah,
Trustee
I
Gillis.
think it's more a reflection. I think I could possibly use some more information about the international program, but to my understanding, our students, our international students, come here for an international education. They come here for a cultural immersion. They come here for language development and skills. They come here to be cared for in a home that is supportive and caring and treats them in the ideal world as if they would be treating their own children. And it has not been my experience to believe that isn't what our students return to their own countries at the end of the year. So I'm not sure of what those skills and experiences are that they are being deprived of or that they are losing. That is a question I can't answer. I do know that I have contact with a number, although a small number, of international students through our own Rotary Exchange program, because a lot of those kids become friends of some of our students, and I've met them, and they always seem to feel like it's a bit of a gift to come to a community like Campbell River and have the kind of education that they have. So at this point, I don't believe I could support the motion, but that is just a very personal reflection.
Trustee Higgin.
As you know, I think this just brings up the point that we really have no policy on this. And I think it would do very well, because all of our policy goes through this whole structure of consultation, of talking to the user group or whoever necessary. I've tried to avoid being on policy committees for a long time, but those of you who have been so faithful and so true, when it comes back, it's a presentation of the feeling, like, here's a policy that's going to cover this into the future, and perhaps not a knee-jerk reaction. Doesn't mean that we can't still consider the motion, but I really think that this should move forward so that the management has a clear idea of where the board stands on this particular amount of finances. As you well know, there are some districts that half of their funding, free funding inside their district is raised by foreign students. And they have hundreds and hundreds of them, and the sole purpose is to make a profit. But that's not what we do here. We have a limited size, we have a limited group. I think they get a good experience. And I think that needs to be reflected back in how we're going to move ahead in the future. So this brings up a very good point of what are we doing, and if there's nothing on the books, like you were saying, Dave, I think we need something on the books so that in the future it's either on the table or off the table, and we don't have to come across this way. I don't know if motions are the way to change policy. I think we need to actually send it to the policy committee and have it come back to us. And we still have, this is just a it's just a presentation tonight, so there would be time to say, well, bring it up when we're going to be making a motion, or bring it up even tonight and say, is this what we really want to do? So anyways, that's my very unclear thinking coming forward.
Thank you, and I will get back to you, Trustee Harper. Trustee Gladish, followed by Kevin, unless you can clarify some points.
No, I was just going to speak to the motion as it is. We'll stop what is being proposed next, which is helpful because then we can amend it before it comes for a final approval to the board. There is a governance policy development, so they can be, like, if this motion were to pass, then out of this, it would stop the budget, piece, but then we would also look for a governance policy to be developed and written out. So that process would and could still happen, but even if the motion is defeated though, a policy still can be directed to management to do the research and meet with the governance policy committee and bring something forward back to. So there is a helpful, so by this, it does impact the budget, which I'd rather see now than kind of bringing a final budget later. But the, whereas a policy, I doubt a policy, governance policy would be ready by the next meeting. So a governance policy would likely come later, either later this year or next year, so.
Trustee Gladish?
Just to follow up on what's been said already, I really do think that we need a governance policy for that, but we also need a presentation from the person who runs the international program. And so that we have a better understanding of what's involved in it, what's the whole process. I don't know, I have some idea, but I don't know. But I think we need to have as much information as we can before we can even start to draft a policy. And that policy might include how those funds are used and might clarify how those funds are intended to be used. So.
And open for debate on it. Trustee Harper, followed by Trustee McMahon.
Oh, I'm willing to follow Trustee McMahon.
I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think the issue is not solely one about the international program, but correct me if I'm wrong, Trustee Harper, I think it's about using unstable funding to be able to shore up the budget that is outside of the actual funding stream that we get. So it isn't so much about what the international program does or doesn't do. It's about using like bingo money to support the budget that is something that we cannot depend on in perpetuity, and therefore you're worried that we are actually supporting an unsupportable budget by using this money. Am I getting close?
You're most eloquent, Trustee McMahon. You said it so much better than I was saying it. You make the point so clearly. Thank you.
So, you gotta?
Yeah, just the only thing I would add is that the money that's in surplus is money that's left over from this year's revenue, so it's not projected surplus, so just, it's unstable in the year to year, but it's not a guess that, so I just wanted to point that out, that there, it is unstable, it's unpredictable, but the amount that's being proposed is currently existing.
Thank you for that.
Trustee Hagan, followed by Trustee McMahon.
Would it be possible to postpone this vote and so that we can gain more information before we make a decision? Like we have a presentation come back from people in the actual program? Is that possible to do with a motion already on the table?
It's my understanding that if this motion is to move forward, it's going to directly impact budget, which we're currently under in budget cycle. But the policy at a governance level will have to be deferred to the governance, as you mentioned, to the governance committee, which will take a significant, it won't probably be ready until the fall.
I believe a vote can't carry from meeting to meeting, so this vote on the table would have to be addressed right now, either withdrawn or voted on. And if it was to be brought back, it can be brought back at any time on the next meeting or for the next meeting. So.
Okay. And Trustee McMahon, some words?
Yeah, I was just thinking that this is unstable funding. We don't know going forward, but is it that much more unstable than the funding we get per pupil? Because we don't know what our enrollment is going to be in September. We have to guess about that too. And we won't know what our enrollment is next year, so.
Any final comments, Trustee Harper, to wrap the conversation?
So all we have here on the books under administration and funding of the International Student Program is the international program will submit a budget for review each year as part of the annual district budget process. Sufficient funding is determined by the superintendent will be provided annually from the revenue generated from this program for the maintenance of the international student program infrastructure and ongoing marketing activities, as well as for the development of new markets and programs to ensure the future viability of the program. The International Student Program, in consultation with the superintendent or designate and the secretary treasurer, will determine the FTE, full-time equivalent of international students desired for each school year. The total number of international students enrolled in any given school year will be reviewed and restricted to ensure the highest quality program possible for all students in the district. The International Student Program will work closely with senior management and the school-based administrators at both the elementary, middle, and secondary levels to facilitate the placement of appropriate students into the schools of the district. And the International Student Program, in consultation with the superintendent, will prepare all legal documentation required for the students to study in Canada. The International Student Program staff will ensure that adult supervision of each international student is assigned a homestayer, move away from the parent guardian, could be dismissed from the, or I jumped the line there. So it's pretty thin what's here under operational procedures. It's a far cry from Dr. Croskery's, this box is inviolable, we don't touch it. And I thought it's operated really well under that box. I think last year was a terrible, terrible decision. I understand why the board made it. That's fine. I don't want to see it repeated, but I don't want to see it debated as part of the budget process. I would like the Secretary Treasurer to have certainty. If you defeat this motion, you're telling the Secretary Treasurer from here and forevermore, this is now a profit center that you can use to subsidize the budget. Or you can say, no, it's not. Now, there are going to be people at this table who might take offense at me using the idea of profit center, but that's what other districts do. And that's what you did last year. You subsidized $150K that we didn't have.
Trustee Harper, I'm going to call the question. I do, as a final statement, state that the policy that you just read is an operations policy.
That's all we have.
It is not a governance policy.
No,
it is not our role as a board to vote on operations policy. The motion on the floor reads currently that under no circumstance that is the motion that we are voting on currently. If we wish to defer this conversation to the governance committee after gathering more information about our international program, that is what we can control. The operation policies, we can direct the superintendent through our governance board policy, but we do not, as of now, have a governance board policy, and it would require a further motion. So the motion on the floor that I've called the question on is that under no circumstances, Kevin, do you have it?
Okay, under no circumstances shall the surplus from the international student program fees pay.
Under no circumstance shall surplus revenues from the international program paid for by international student fees be spent on any other district program.
So this is the motion currently on the floor. I'd like to call a vote. Those in favor? And those opposed? The motion has been defeated. Moving forward to 14A, which is presentation of the 2023-24 operating budget proposal.
Okay. So, just bring up the presentation. So this is the culmination of a lot of work and input from our district. I'm going to be tonight presenting what the proposals are. So I have to point out that this isn't, this is where board governance works. is that the board has asked senior management to do the facilitation and gathering of information to present that budget. It's not the ST budget, this is a senior management recommendation. And so we begin when we have an idea of to what our funding is going to be in March, and then we reach out, we want ideas. Again, 98% of what you see on here, actually like 99% of what you see on here has come from stakeholders, from employees. We've met with parents, we've met with the Indigenous Advisory Committee. So we've had a couple of different meetings, multiple meetings, trying to provide the information so that we can gather what people are seeing in our schools. It changes year to year, been here for a long, long time, and so what was important 18 years ago is not important today. So it's really important to reach out. When we do reach out, people, the board and our stakeholders are putting a lot of trust in us that recommendations are going to come forward that reflect what was said. So we earlier provided trustees with all the items. We got about 260 suggestions this year. When I go through it, I'll be able to show, I think we were able to support 4. So there's a lot that unfortunately can't be supported. Heading into this year, when we started our budget cycle, it's fairly tight. And it's fairly tight because sometimes my estimate on where I thought we would be was off quite a bit. I thought in January that we would probably be in a surplus position. So then when we got all the updated numbers in the funding, we ended up and we started the year in a deficit of $288,000. So when we started those meetings, the message was we don't have a lot of money for ads. And I think that's part of why we saw the suggestions kind of reduced. Typically we'll get about 400 different ideas and suggestions, and this year we had about 260. So based on that, the first thing that we did was we do have some items at the top. So benefit holiday, I've got one time there, and it is something that pops up, and the reason why we call it a one-time item is because it's not certain that it's going to be there. So when we use it this year, it's not built into next year's budget. We'll have to check in with our benefit provider to see if it is there. Why we use it is we actually, if we don't use it, then the benefit provider keeps the cash and they don't they don't adjust their rates to ever use this. So once they have that surplus, it gets returned back to the board. As mentioned earlier, we do have a proposal for international program surplus to be used of $100,000. It doesn't have a one-time item on it, but it's subject to change year to year. So you'll see it this year. Maybe it's there next year. Maybe it's not, especially if the board changes policy on that. But this is coming from revenues that have been received this year that haven't been spent. Our international program, they managed their program really, really well fiscally. Based on COVID, they know that there's some impacts, so they usually do build a little bit of a buffer in there just in case students return home before the end of the year. But this year, things are looking good. So there is some available. And that's not all the surplus that's available, but it's a good portion of it. Now the difference from what you had in your documents is I had basically reductions and then had the list, but there were some items on here. We can either look at like reductions or new grant revenue. So federal French grant is a new grant that we have that we are receiving. We've had some great success with our federal French grants the last 2 years, where we've been able to add a lot of services. And this came in just in budget time. Like sometimes this comes in after budget and is not part of budget, but we thought we would include it because unfortunately there's not a lot up here that we were able to add. So we wanted to share when we met back with the budget committees that we were able to add some other items. So $180,000 of funding. It's kind of highlighted yellow because it matches and really supports these 3 items down here. If that French grant funding disappears, then the 3 items down below disappear. They're connected. Now, we do have, now, speaking of concerns about surplus, this is the first year where we are proposing to utilize a summer school surplus. Summer school was another program that really has always been break even. You get the questions of how many classes can we add, what's our break even point? But this past year, our summer school program changed a bit, which, and really well managed again, it's getting more and more popular, but it actually produced a $65,000 surplus. Wow. And the intention is to continue with that model setup next year. And so we have identified this. Could it be a one-time thing? Could it not? We don't know at this point in time. We'll see and we'll monitor how the program goes this year. And then rents and leases. So the $25,000, I, as of right now, know that we will be increasing. We've got different tenant agreements that will be providing this money. So it wasn't here when we set the 288 back in March, but we know about it now. So really what that has allowed us to do is to add some things. So the additions, and just go through some of the additions. So HR assistant, succession planning. So shortages, staff shortages, growth of our positions. We've actually been adding a lot of staff lately, and the HR department is requesting and needing quite a bit extra help. They put a proposal forward, and again, being a very slim year, we really identified this position, which there will be some turnover, perhaps a retirement, and we're looking at utilizing a little bit extra funds to get somebody in early to help build capacity, to help that transition of the HR department with developing some process procedures that really try to make things more efficient. Their workload and the numbers and hires has really gone up over the last couple of years. Career education, district support. So that's what I always love, because the first thing I learned my first year as an employee at School District 72 is how resourceful teachers work. And this totally reminds me of that. So we've got a proposal for career education district support to support our career programs. So there are different sources for career program options for students, but they're kind of complicated, require a lot of programming, planning, I should say, planning for programming, and a lot of paperwork. And if that paperwork isn't filled out correctly, it can lead to potentially lost opportunities for students. It leads to less efficient use of staffing. So, so it was really important that we build that in. It really will, the opportunity for students will be huge. Now, so this is for a QP support position to support with that back end stuff. But there's different sources of where the funding is going to come from. So again, the resourcefulness. So there's a Skills Canada grant that we received that we will use for part of the salary. So this is really a full position, that 1.0. And then,
I don't like that job.
No, this is our cost, but that's not the value that we're talking about. And we are looking to take some career blocks from the schools back to cover some of this. And really what I feel, and I think Morgan feels, hoping for the same, is that through that efficient planning, the staffing in the schools can be done a little bit better, than actually frees up more staffing to use for all classes and programs. So it then goes beyond the benefit of just careers, as it'll give other options for others, for other classes. Ed Center support. So, you know, as things have been changing, we are a district that still has an Ed Center, centralized Ed Center. We had a fairly big Ed Center program a couple of years ago, and last year, $2.1 million worth of reductions. We had identified significant reductions in the Ed Center, but we weren't ready to stop the resources going out. So we reduced it down to a 3-day-a-week position, QP position. But the feedback is that some of the resources aren't being maybe respected as much as they should be, and that some things aren't getting signed out. So it was brought up to our attention that we really need full coverage for that position. What we've been doing is with that reduction, we have been monitoring what the impacts, again, was we reach out, what are the field principal schools about that program. And at this point, we feel we need to bring it up to a full-time just for that completeness and that coverage, and we'll continue monitoring it. And then childcare early learning. So this one's coming on the heels of we're just kind of getting things going, and we are receiving grants from the ministry, but we think we're pretty sure that the grant's going to be about $40,000 less next year than it is this year. So we really think, especially at this critical time, that it's important to try to maintain that support. So we've identified this to have it in place just in case we don't get it. So, we've got that ready to support that program. And then I mentioned earlier the French coordinator, French literacy, and French for support for LSC for middle school. So these things are connected with that grant. This is in for next year, but it potentially could not. Over on the far right, we do have some of our tie into priorities. It's really, really tiny printing, but you know, as we go through this, we are connecting priorities with decisions. It's always easier to do it when you add than when you take away, but we've identified which priorities. And priority 1 is improve student achievement, and priority 2 is build a culture of learning and wellness, and priority 3 is honor Indigenous worldviews and perspectives. So, so this is a big part of what we have done. We do have, and these are the new items shared tonight. The reason why we share them is to get feedback. So if there's concerns about items up on here, we want to hear about them. So it is purposeful why we bring it to the board's attention early. And then if we'll monitor, we'll look for feedback throughout the week, and if there's anything significant that comes, maybe we'll modify it for the proposal but we'll definitely, if there's any changes, we'll bring that to the board's attention. The other thing too, we do have a learning support services, some program additions that we are looking to add that will enhance services for many of our students, but it's not a budget add or a new request from of the board. So we will have some changes within that program that have been shared with a lot of the budget committees and very well supported for that. So here is, this is what we got. And this is what we'll be looking to take forward for the board's approval May 30th.
Any questions for Kevin? Trustee Harper?
Yeah, the federal French funding, was that tied to all French instruction, or was it all about immersion and program francophone?
Immersion.
It's all
So
immersion.
it was federal targeted funding to either increase the number of French immersion students and or retain. We don't have a lot of space, so we're really focusing on retaining our French immersion students. And that's why you see the LST at middle school.
Yeah.
Is a lot of feedback we were getting is that kids were family putting them back into English.
Yeah.
There has not been French immersion LST support at middle, so they pulled them out in elementary early. So we're hoping that we're going to be able to turn that tide.
Cool.
Yeah, so it's very targeted as to the specific
Immersion.
for that that funding.
Any other further questions about the proposals? I do have a little comment. I'd like to thank for the addition for the Ed Center. We cut that program quite heavily last year, and I appreciate that we're being responsive to the conversations that are being had about resources and the disappearance of such. So I think that's a good addition. And you know, to speak to Trustee Harper's point, we are still running a structural deficit of $300,000.
Yeah.
But without increased funding to the FTEs or additional student population growth, that's what it looks like right now. So I'm glad that we have programs such as the international program and summer school surplus, so we don't have to cut out of classrooms. More babies.
They're coming.
Well,
I see them.
Fortunately, none of the advertisers were willing to respond, otherwise it would have happened.
So on to 14B, which is the quarterly budget analysis.
Hydro has no.
You're on again, Kevin.
Yeah, I'm trying to keep this one just to the front forwarding sheets and hit the highlights. So you have the full document in front of you. I hope you've had a chance to look at it and you have questions for me, so we can get into more specifics. But
Here it is.
so this is up to the third quarter. Quickly, some of the first part is, you can see that our revenue at 46.8 million is higher than what we had budgeted year to date by $500,000. So that's about 101% of where we had expected to be, which is great news. When you come down and look at the expenses, we are a little bit over our budgeted expenses year to date of about 340,000, but it's about 101%. So it's good that as the costs go up, the revenues are up to at least exceed it. I'll also point out that the actual year-to-date revenues is less than the expenses, but this year we had planned for a balanced budget. So that by the time it gets to the end, as we do the budget year to date, we factor things in. We take 1/10 of the cost in for teachers, but we take 1/12 of the cost in for revenues. Those should all match up and it should be a balanced budget. So that's some of that higher end. There's also some items like labor settlement, cost of living that aren't built into the expenses or into the revenues, with the ministry operating rent being our biggest. Miscellaneous revenue is a nice surprise that it is higher and much higher than what we had budgeted year to date and for the entire year, as well as the investment income is also higher than what we had expected. So the budget that we're going to bring to you next week, we've adjusted interest income up, which has helped the ongoing operating budget. But you can see that for this year, we probably kept it back a little bit as things were going up. So that's page. When we get into here, so our biggest group and function, you can see that the instructions at $52 million, $53 million, that for the most part, we're right on budget. So, in the past, we've had concerns with this function about sick replacement costs. I know other districts right now are dealing with having to adjust and they're in pretty big deficits because they're trying to catch up. But last year, we were able to adjust inflation and sick replacement to have caught up to that. So that is looking really good. When you come down to, there's one item that I have to bring up, the benefits. When you cycle over to the right, you see a $495,000 overspend of benefits. Now, we utilized $350,000 of the benefit holiday last year, and that was to be applied across all employee groups. When we budgeted it, we only put it into the instruction account because it was the biggest. So that reduced the budget, but the expense savings were actually spread throughout the rest of it. So you'll notice operation and maintenance, $130,000 like under budget. That's some of that combination there. So there's that. Another one that I have to under district administration. You'll notice that the professional staff is over by 21%. So that is some of the turnover that we've been having, where we've had to bring on multiple positions. So we've had some leaves, we've had some other things that have come up, and when and where we can have them kind of cross-training at the same time, it is definitely helpful. But we have had a lot of additional expenses in that. The DEOC being under district administration, or being over, that's, it's a small amount and not of a concern. And then looking at the supplies, again, we are a little bit over under operations and maintenance supplies, that'll, $261,000. And by the time everything gets to the end of the year, we should be pretty good. Yeah, so, but, you know, you take all those other pieces of concerns and you take a look at the year-to-date. Right now, we're currently forecasting that we'll be overspent in supplies by about 340, but I do expect that to catch up and to be balanced and possibly a surplus by the end of this year. So, lots of detailed pages behind, but I'll just leave it to you to see if you have any questions about that stuff.
Any questions from the board currently? I have a budget question, Kevin. So when we're talking about tech replacement, where does tech replacement money come from?
So we have an operating budget amount that we allocate to operations and maintenance that will cover capital equipment replacement.
And is that funded by government? Like, does government fund tech?
Not at all, no. So we had a $1.8 million capital IT plan that we had identified maybe 6 or 7 years ago. And that came from underinvestment in tech for like decades. Like it never really had gotten up to where it needed to be. So the board made that huge commitment from surplus. It was a 3-year program that really started to catch us up. And as part of that, the board had identified, we don't want this to happen again. So the board increased the annual capital equipment replacement that went to IT over a couple of years. I just received a report that says as of now, that's not quite enough. So the cost escalations with technology has not quite kept up with the budgets that we have in there. So, and so it is something that will need to come forward to the board at future times. But you ask a great question because we do receive capital funding for mechanical systems, $300,000 roofing projects, $800,000 mechanical systems, and we currently have a $4.8 million tech capital equipment cost.
Right, I just question if that's an advocacy point for trustees, that it be built into a standard operating costs.
Absolutely, and I think we were, I feel as a district, we were fortunate where we had undergone some pretty significant tech implementation changes just in time for COVID. We took on teams. We had a lot of mobile devices that had already been distributed out to schools and teachers, and it was difficult to learn, but it made a big difference. I talked to a school district mid-province who still don't have their teams set up for their staff. So remote work, remote support and teaching is not available to them. So, but with that, mobile devices is a whole lot more expensive than just doing the standard traditional PCs that we used to do. So if the board would like to support BCSTA and advocate on that, that now makes a whole lot of sense, way more sense than it used to.
Yeah, I know that was totally off topic. It was just something that I was reading through.
Yeah.
Are there any further questions for Kevin? Seeing none, we'll move on to the presentation of the finance warrant number 8 dated February 28th, 2023. And the finance warrant is in our package. It is our monthly warrant prepared by our accounting department that shows us allocation of expenses. Yeah, absolutely. So the motion that the finance warrant number 8 dated February 28th, 2023 be accepted as presented, moved by trustee Hagan, seconded by trustee Gladish. Any discussion? All those in favor? And it's moved. Probably shouldn't raise that. Okay, on to committee reports. So, BCSTA AGM. So my name's beside it. So trustees, a number of trustees had an opportunity to attend the BCSTA AGM. The theme of this year's AGM was Level Up, improving student achievement through equity, diversity, and inclusion. Our keynote speaker was Jody Wilson-Raybould. She came with the in-betweener message and a really powerful message around courageousness and how we must, sorry Jen, can you give me the three? Learn, listen,
understand,
and act.
It's in her book.
Thank you.
You read it.
Listen, I've got it. I haven't quite got that far. So
have
listen,
2 books.
understand, and act. We were followed with great sessions around anti-racism, student achievement, board governance. This is the first BCSTA AGM for a number of our board members, so thank you for attending. The business session is always thrilling, but it's good to understand some of the topics that are bubbling around the province. And those topics would include student agency and voice. There was a lot of conversations around student agency and voice, anti-racism work, honoring Indigenous worldviews and board governance. There were provincial themes emerging around facilities, both the deteriorating facilities in rural environments and new facilities necessitated by massive growth in some of the lower mainland districts. Recruitment and retention of teachers and specialists, especially in the north. They have had an ongoing challenge with qualified professionals for decades. Inflationary pressures to boards, and of course, affordability for families. And on to the next committee report, which is Provincial Council. Craig.
Yeah, I don't have anything substantive to report, but just so that everyone understands, each of our districts has one individual who represents them at the provincial council. So there are 60 people gathered, and normally what would happen is we would vote on behalf of our school district, but of course this was the AGM. In essence, what we were doing was just approving the minutes and of the meeting that we had in February. I would say the technology, the electronic technology works better for 60 than it does for 350. And in fact, it was again a great example at the AGM to see what pivoting looks like. And so instead of using our devices, which everyone had been trained to use, we were raising our hands, good old fashioned. It was great. Yeah. Yeah, I would just say that it was a great experience to be with people who I think share the same heart and belief that there are some things that we are all working towards, and our independent boards have an opportunity to consolidate, to collaborate. There was a really strong northern and rural voice that was coming out as underrepresented. There's certainly steps forward in saying how can we represent our underrepresented Indigenous voices, those people who we have much learning at this point to do. We need to start to ask thoughtful questions, and we need to listen very carefully and act. And finally, I guess I would just say it was great to have 3 breakout sessions at the AGM, because I think you could explore areas such as anti-racism, where we could see the examples of some other districts that have done some very fine work. So yeah, I'm really proud to be, when you sit at the table, and actually I was going to say you sit at the table of 72, but one of the motions passed was that we now begin to use our names rather than our numbers. So we are now Campbell River School District, and that may undergo some other transformations or changes I anticipate in the future. But yeah, I'm just very proud to be part of and representative of this school district, because I think we're pretty amazing. So, thank you.
That goes with those. That concludes our agenda. I'm just going to ask for online questions.
There are no online questions.
And are there any submitted questions from the gallery? Go ahead, Deb.
Is her name Gallery?
Yeah,
Yeah, that's right.
I have 2 questions and then a quick comment about the board's indulgence. A question through the chair to the Secretary Treasurer. Can you confirm it's listed here, the benefit holiday of $200,000 as a one-time? If I recall, last year's budget also included a benefit type holiday, as I recall, about $100,000. So is my recollection wrong, or is that not a one-time piece?
So we have actually accessed the benefit holiday probably 10 times. But I can't guarantee there's going to be an 11th. So my biggest concern with the benefit holiday, because it shows up often, is I want people to know that it's not guaranteed, it's not certain. So for me to put one time on there just kind of highlights it, don't expect it next year. You may see it next year, but like we were sitting on $500,000 benefit surplus last year. It's now down to like 250,000. So it is declining. But it was more for a perception and an expectation, right? Like I don't want it. So when the year it doesn't show up, somebody might ask, where is it? And we'll have to say it's not available. So.
Thank you. And I just want to, I'm just wondering through the chair, if the board is aware that the addition of the ed support is actually not returning all of the services of our district education center. It is returning the QP services or the services that are provided by a QP employee, but that our district librarian, who took a significant hit, as well as the budget of that resource center, are you aware that it is not going to be returning all of the services of that education center? It is only going to be returning the services that the QP person would provide and not what the district teacher librarian would provide.
Thank you for the information, Deb. I believe I was aware, but I'm not sure that the rest of the board was. So thank you for stating the actual reinstatement for the Ed Center due to current budget restraints. I'm happy to see that there is some reinstatement, and I don't disregard the fact that there was some significant budget cuts and a significant position cut when we had to balance budget last year. And I hope that in the future we can continue to shore up those services. That's all I've got.
Can I just add, just for clarification and accuracy, if my memory serves me right, we actually haven't restored all of the QP services. We had 1.5 FTE, and so we've restored it to 1. So it's not even a full return of QP services to the Ed Center. So it remains shorter staffed going into September this year than it was prior to the cuts to that center.
Thank you for that clarification. You are correct in that. So thank you. And just a brief comment with your indulgence. I just wanted to let the board know that 2 weeks ago I was acclaimed as the CRDTA president for the upcoming 2023-2024 school year. So you will all see my smiling face at board meetings next year. And I just wanted to let you know that tomorrow night's AGM will elect the rest of my executive. So you will hopefully see some new faces at various meetings and things throughout the year, and that the CRDTA is celebrating its 35th year of being a local of the BCTF, and we are going to have a little internal celebration tomorrow night following our AGM with some other things perhaps to come later, but just for your information, thank you for the indulgence of letting me make more of a comment than a question.
No problem, Deb, and congratulations
Yes.
on your acclamation, and we look forward to our positive working relationship going into 23-24. Woo! Andrea, did you have a comment from the?
Yeah, I just have a question to share as well. I'm just looking through some of the information that was shared this evening. Do senior management and exempt staff have a salary grid that takes into account their years of service?
I'm unsure.
No, there is a scale for senior management and for principals based on performance. Principals, we have it linked to years of service. Senior management is linked simply to performance.
Right.
So, with your indulgence, since Jeff got to do it, I can.
Yeah.
All right. 3723 will be celebrating its 65th year in September, and so I'd like to just put the board on notice and senior management that we are going to have a celebration event, and we'll all be receiving invitations.
Sure.
Put it in your calendars and look forward to celebrating. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Andrea.
Told her 9.
Any further questions, online questions,
No.
Jennifer? Looking for a motion to adjourn.
He's back.
Trustee Hagan. Meeting